You ever get that feeling someone is watching you? Not the paranoid kind where you just feel uneasy in a dark room. The real kind, where something in your gut tells you that another person has been studying your life, your schedule, your movements, without you ever knowing. That feeling is one of the most terrifying experiences a human being can go through. And the stories I have for you today prove exactly why. These are 3 real stalker horror stories, and I want to warn you right now, some of what you are about to hear is deeply disturbing. These are accounts from real people who lived through absolute nightmares, and by the end of this video, I guarantee you will never look at a seemingly innocent coincidence the same way again. Stay with me, because the 3rd story is the one that keeps me up at night. I am saving it for last, because once you hear it, you will understand why. Let us get into it. This comes from a woman named Claire, who was 26 years old when the situation began. She had recently moved into a new apartment in a mid-sized city, started a new job, and was honestly feeling really good about where her life was heading. She described it as one of those rare seasons where everything seemed to be falling into place. The first thing she noticed was a man she kept running into at her gym. She went 3 mornings a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, always at 6:15 in the morning before work, and this guy was always there. Always on the treadmill closest to the window, always arriving around the same time she did. She figured he just had a similar schedule. That is a completely reasonable assumption, right? Gyms have regulars. People fall into patterns. She did not think twice about it. Then she started noticing him near her office building. She worked on the 4th floor of a building that had a coffee shop on the ground level, and she would sometimes grab a coffee before heading up. He would be sitting at one of the tables outside. Again, not alarming on its own. The coffee shop was open to everyone. He could have worked nearby. People sit outside and have coffee all the time. But then things started stacking up in a way that became impossible to ignore. She mentioned to a coworker one afternoon that she was going to try a new restaurant a few blocks over after work. She had never been there before. She had just seen it online and thought it looked good. She went that evening alone, got seated, and within 15 minutes, he walked in and was seated 2 tables away from her. She told herself it was a coincidence. She told herself she was being paranoid. But the feeling in her stomach told her something different. The next week, she decided to test something. She changed her gym schedule without telling anyone. Instead of going Monday morning, she switched to Tuesday evening. She walked in, and within 10 minutes, he was there. Same treadmill, window side. She felt the blood drain from her face. She started paying closer attention and realized something that genuinely horrified her. He was not just showing up in the same places. He was showing up in the right places at the right times. He was not randomly orbiting her life. He had mapped it. He had studied her patterns, her habits, her routines, and when she changed those routines without warning, he adjusted too. That meant he had another way of knowing where she would be. She checked her car and found a small GPS tracker tucked up underneath the rear bumper, magnetically attached in a spot you would never see unless you were specifically looking. She went to the police immediately. They pulled the device and traced the purchase. The man turned out to be an acquaintance from a party she had attended over a year earlier. They had spoken for maybe 20 minutes. He had taken her number, she had been polite and given it to him, and she had not heard from him since. She had completely forgotten he existed. But he had not forgotten her. His phone contained hundreds of photos of her taken from a distance, logs of her daily movements, a handwritten notebook with observations about her behavior, what she wore, what she ordered at coffee shops, what time she typically left work. He had built an entire profile of her life without her consent and without her knowledge. He was arrested and charged, and Claire has since relocated and changed her name. She said in a post she shared online that the most terrifying part was not the tracker or the photos. It was the realization that she had been living inside someone else's obsession for over a year without knowing it. Her ordinary days, her normal routines, her small daily choices, they had all become data points in someone else's fixation. Let that sink in for a moment. Because that brings me to something I want you to think about as we move through these stories. Stalking does not always start with threats. It does not always start with aggressive behavior. Sometimes it starts so quietly that by the time you realize what is happening, it has been going on for a very long time. This one involves a man named Daniel. He was 32, worked in logistics, lived alone in a house he had recently bought in a quiet suburban neighborhood. By all accounts, he was a private, low-key person, did not post much on social media, did not share his address publicly, was not the kind of person you would think of as someone who would attract this kind of attention. It started with emails. The first one arrived on a Tuesday morning, and the subject line simply said, "I see you." He opened it and found a paragraph describing what he had done the previous day, what time he left for work, what he was wearing, where he stopped for gas, what he ordered at lunch. Specific details that no one could have known unless they had been physically watching him the day before. He assumed it was a prank, maybe someone he knew pulling a weird joke. He replied, asking who it was. No response. He tried to trace the email address and found it led back to a disposable account with no identifying information. The next email came 3 days later. Same format, another detailed account of his daily movements, this time including what time he got home, which lights he turned on in his house, and what time those lights went off. That last detail stopped him cold. His bedroom was at the back of the house, and you could only see that window from one specific angle, which was a strip of public land behind his property that backed up against a walking trail. Someone had been standing in the dark on that trail, watching his house. He went to the police and they took a report, but there was not much they could do at that point. No crime had been committed, no threats had been made, just creepy emails with no traceable source. The emails continued for 6 weeks. Every few days, another detailed account of his life. And throughout this time, Daniel started changing his behavior. He stopped going to the same places. He varied his routes. He covered his windows. He bought exterior security cameras and installed them around his property. He started sleeping with the lights on. And then something shifted. The emails stopped. 2 weeks of silence. And Daniel, as horrible as this sounds, started to feel relieved. He told himself maybe whoever it was had moved on. Maybe they had gotten bored. Maybe they had just wanted to scare him and felt satisfied. Then one morning he woke up and found the side gate to his backyard open. He always kept it closed and latched. He went out to check and found a folded piece of paper tucked under a potted plant near his back door. Inside the paper was a single photograph. It was a photo of Daniel sleeping, taken through his bedroom window, time-stamped 3 nights earlier. Someone had been in his backyard, standing outside his bedroom window in the middle of the night, taking photographs. He called the police immediately, and this time they treated it with far more urgency. They set up a surveillance operation around his property, and within 5 nights they caught someone. A woman who lived 4 streets away, someone he had never met, never spoken to, never interacted with in any way he could identify. When investigators spoke to her, she could not give a coherent explanation for her behavior. She had an elaborate collection of photos, notes, and printed maps related to Daniel's life. She had been watching him for over 3 months before the emails started, and she had escalated to entering his property when she felt that the emails alone were not generating the response she was looking for. Daniel later said in a recorded interview that what disturbed him most about the experience was not the intrusion itself, as terrifying as that was. It was the fact that she had been right there, right in his neighborhood, someone whose face he probably would have recognized from the street without ever knowing who she was, watching him long before he had any idea she existed. The familiarity of the setting made it worse. It was not a stranger from far away. It was someone embedded in the ordinary landscape of his daily life. She was charged with multiple counts of criminal stalking and entered a mental health diversion program as part of her sentencing. Daniel moved away shortly after. He has not disclosed where. I need you to stick with me now, because the next story is the one I genuinely debated whether to include. Not because it is too disturbing, although it absolutely is, but because of how sophisticated and calculated the behavior was. This is not a story about someone who is emotionally unwell and acting on impulse. This is a story about someone who was patient, intelligent, and terrifyingly methodical. This account comes from a woman named Mara. She was 34 years old, a school teacher, divorced, living with her 2 kids in a house she had bought after her marriage ended. She described herself as someone who had worked hard to rebuild her life and her sense of safety after a difficult few years, and she was proud of what she had built. Her neighbor, a man she knew as Greg, had lived next door since before she moved in. He was in his late 40s, retired early from some kind of financial career, and by all appearances was a completely normal, friendly, helpful neighbor. He shoveled her driveway in winter without being asked. He would wave when she pulled in. He occasionally chatted with her kids over the fence. She trusted him. She felt lucky to have a neighbor like that. This went on for nearly 2 years. The first sign that something was wrong came from one of her kids, her 10-year-old daughter, who mentioned one evening that Greg had asked her a lot of questions that day about whether Mom was seeing anyone, whether Mom brought people over, whether Mom had mentioned anything about a new job or moving. The daughter did not think much of it at the time. Kids do not always clock when questions are strange. But when she related to Mara that night, Mara felt deeply uncomfortable. She told her daughter not to talk to Greg anymore and started paying closer attention. Over the next several weeks, she started noticing things she had previously dismissed. Her trash bags being moved slightly from where she had left them, as if someone had gone through them and replaced them imperfectly. Small things in her garden that were disturbed. A feeling that the side window of her house was being watched because Greg's upstairs window had a direct line of sight to it, and she had seen the curtain move several times when she looked up. She bought a set of indoor cameras and positioned them to monitor her windows and doors from the inside. And what she captured within the first 10 days changed everything. One of the cameras, positioned near her living room window, captured Greg standing in her side yard at 2 a.m, pressed against the exterior wall, looking through a gap in the curtain. He stood there for over 40 minutes without moving, just watching whatever he could see inside her home while her children slept upstairs. She did not confront him. She was smart about this. She called the police immediately, and they came out that night, reviewed the footage, and questioned Greg. He denied everything, claimed he had been sleepwalking, which investigators did not find credible given that he was fully dressed, including a jacket and shoes. He was issued a warning, and a no-contact order was put in place. But here is where the story enters a different dimension entirely. When investigators began looking more closely at Greg following the no-contact order, they discovered things that reframed the entire situation. He had not moved in next door by accident. He had been watching Mara before she even lived in that house. He had tracked her through a combination of public records and social media, identified the neighborhood she was likely to move to based on her search behavior, which he had accessed through a compromised email account, and had rented the house next door approximately 6 weeks before she made her purchase. He had engineered being her neighbor. He had spent 2 years building trust, making himself indispensable, becoming part of the landscape of her daily life, so that she would never suspect him. He was not acting on impulse or emotional instability. This was a calculated, long-term operation. Every friendly gesture, every shoveled driveway, every over-the-fence conversation had been a deliberate tool in a sustained effort to get close to her. Among the items found in his home was a detailed journal spanning the entire 2 years he had lived next door. It documented everything: what she wore each day, who visited her, what time she went to bed, conversations he had overheard, his observations about her children's routines. There were also contact details for her ex-husband, her parents, her school, her best friend, and several other people in her life. He had built a complete map of her entire social world. Investigators also discovered that Mara was not the first. There was evidence of at least 2 previous women who had been subjected to similar behavior, though in those cases, no formal complaints had been filed. Greg was arrested and charged with stalking, criminal surveillance, and computer fraud. He is currently awaiting trial. Mara has spoken publicly about her experience since then. She said that the part she has had the hardest time processing is the way he weaponized normalcy. Every time she had felt safe and settled in her neighborhood, every time she had felt grateful for a good neighbor, those feelings had been manufactured by someone who had spent 2 years carefully constructing them. Her sense of security had been a trap. She said, and I think this is the part that stays with me the most, that there was a version of her life she believed she was living, and then there was the reality of what was actually happening. And those two things existed simultaneously, completely invisible to each other, for nearly 2 years. Now I want to talk to you for a minute about something important. These 3 stories share a common thread that goes beyond the obvious horror. In each case, the person being targeted had no idea what was happening until they were already deep inside it. And in each case, the behavior had been going on for a long time before any alarm was raised. Claire had been tracked for over a year. Daniel had been watched for months before the emails even started. Mara lived next door to her stalker for nearly 2 years without knowing the truth. This is one of the most unsettling realities of stalking behavior, which is that it is often invisible in its early stages. The stalker has every advantage in the beginning because they know everything, and the target knows nothing. There are a few things that researchers and law enforcement professionals consistently point to when it comes to identifying early warning signs. Not to make you paranoid, but because awareness genuinely matters. The first is the coincidence pattern. One unexpected encounter is a coincidence. 2 is notable. 3 or more in unconnected locations or contexts is something you should pay attention to. Our brains are wired to rationalize coincidences away, especially when the person involved seems harmless or normal. But if someone keeps appearing in your life in ways that seem statistically unlikely, trust that instinct. The second is boundary testing. Many stalkers will test how a target responds to low-level intrusions before escalating. A question that feels too personal, a gesture that feels too familiar, a comment that suggests they know more about you than they should. These tests are designed to measure your reaction. If you do not react, they interpret that as permission to go further. The third is the sudden knowledge gap. If someone in your life seems to know things they should not know about your schedule, your habits, your personal life, and you cannot figure out how they would have learned those things, do not brush it off. That gap in the explanation matters. Now, I also want to say something about the emotional experience of the people in these stories, because I think it gets overlooked in favor of the horror elements. Every single person in these accounts described a phase of self-doubt, a period where they questioned whether they were overreacting. Claire convinced herself she was being paranoid about a gym regular. Daniel told himself the emails were someone's idea of a prank. Mara pushed down her discomfort about Greg's questions because he had been nothing but kind to her for 2 years. This self-doubt is not a character flaw. It is a completely human response to something your brain does not want to be true. Because accepting that you are being stalked means accepting that someone out there has made you the center of an obsession. And that reality is so fundamentally threatening that your mind resists it. But that resistance can cost you time that you do not have. If you are ever in a situation where something feels wrong, even if you cannot fully articulate why, take it seriously. Tell someone. Document everything. Keep records of dates, times, locations, screenshots, anything that creates a paper trail. And do not wait for something to escalate to a level that feels serious enough before reaching out to authorities. Because by the time it reaches that level, the person doing this to you has already been at it for a while. You are allowed to be wrong. You are allowed to report something and have it turn out to be nothing. That is infinitely better than the alternative. I also want to acknowledge something about these stories that I think deserves to be said plainly. The three people in these accounts, Claire, Daniel, and Mara, did nothing to cause what happened to them. There is sometimes a cultural tendency to look for what a target could have done differently, what they posted online, how they interacted with people, whether they were too friendly or not careful enough. That framing puts the responsibility in the wrong place. Stalking is not caused by something the target did. It is caused by the choices of the person doing it. Full stop. Now, before I wrap this up, I want to tell you one more thing about Mara's story that I found particularly striking. After Greg was arrested and the extent of what he had done became clear, one of her neighbors, an older woman who lived 3 houses down, mentioned that she had always thought there was something slightly off about Greg. She could not say exactly what it was, just a feeling, a way he watched people a little too carefully, a vagueness about his past that she had always found slightly odd. She had never said anything because she did not have anything specific to point to, just a feeling. I think about that a lot. We are often taught to dismiss our instincts about people when we cannot back them up with concrete evidence. We tell ourselves we are being judgmental or unfair or paranoid, and sometimes that is true. But there is a reason human beings evolved the capacity for threat detection. There is a reason your gut responds to things before your conscious mind has caught up to them. That system exists for a reason, and it deserves more credit than we typically give it. You do not have to act on every uneasy feeling you have about someone, but you should not automatically dismiss it either. Hold it. Notice it. Pay attention to whether it accumulates over time. Because in every one of these stories, there was a moment, usually early on, where something felt wrong. And in every one of these stories, that feeling was right. So what do you do with all of this? You stay aware without becoming consumed by fear. You take your instincts seriously. You talk to the people in your life about how you are feeling when something seems off. You know that stalking is far more common than most people realize, that it happens to people of all backgrounds in all kinds of settings, and that it does not always look the way movies have led us to believe it does. It does not always start with a threatening phone call or someone following you down an alley. Sometimes it starts with someone on the treadmill next to yours. Sometimes it starts with a neighbor who seems too good to be true. Sometimes it starts with an email that you try to convince yourself is a joke. The stories I have shared with you today are not just horror stories. They are also something close to survival guides, if you read them the right way. Each one contains a moment where the target recognized something was wrong and took action. Claire tested her theory and then checked her car. Daniel documented everything and kept going back to police. Mara used her own camera footage to build an undeniable record. They all got through it, and they all chose to talk about what happened to them, which I think takes an enormous amount of courage, because putting your story out there means other people might recognize something in their own lives before it gets worse. That is why these stories matter, not just because they are terrifying, which they absolutely are, but because they are real, and because the people who live them chose not to let that reality stay hidden. If this video resonated with you or made you think about your own situation or someone you care about, I want you to share it. Because sometimes the most useful thing a story can do is reach the right person at the right time. And if you are currently going through something that feels similar to anything you heard today, please reach out to someone. Whether that is law enforcement, a stalking advocacy resource, or just someone you trust. You do not have to handle it alone, and you should not try to. Thank you for watching all the way to the end of this one. I know it was heavy. I know some of it was hard to sit with. But I appreciate you being here and taking these stories seriously. If you want more content like this, I have got more videos on real crime, psychological horror, and the darker corners of human behavior that I think you are going to find just as compelling. The algorithm is going to show you something next, and I genuinely hope you click on it, because I put just as much care into every single one of these. Stay safe, trust your gut, and I will see you in the next one.